Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Good morning from New York. Good evening to all those viewers in India. And welcome to Jaipur Dialogue USA show today. Today we are going to talk about Islamophobia bill that has been passed by the US Congress. While there is still some distance to be covered with reference to Senate approval and the presidential sign-off, the bill by itself is a matter of concern. One wonders at times that in these tough times of many variations of coronavirus that is hitting the United States with a new fervor, that the budgetary implications of many actions are seriously under consideration. Price rise is at the highest levels. With all these issues plaguing the economy and the political system, we still have time. The House had time to pass a bill which has very serious repercussions of its own. I have great pleasure in welcoming Mr. Robert Spencer. He has been leading a jihad, if I may say so, for the understanding of Islam for the regular world. And congratulations, Robert. You have been an outstanding spokesperson, daring to be different and trying to bring about the truth about Islam. Before I venture out and request Robert to comment on my essential question that I wanted to talk about, to all the viewers, please like, subscribe, and press the bell icon for Jaipur Dialogue USA and Jaipur Dialogue. And those of you who are subscribers of only Jaipur Dialogue, support Jaipur Dialogue USA as well by subscribing to Jaipur Dialogue USA YouTube channel. Having said that, I also wanted to add, folks, if you want to ask questions, please do. Because this is a very important issue concerning the world today, that despite everything, somewhere along the line, an agenda is being foisted upon us on the rest of the world. So, Robert, my question to you is, as I mentioned in my note in the Twitter, why was it such an essential rush to pass the bill? That's one. And why is it, that's the question that had been boggling my mind for a very long time, why is it that in the West, people have been virtually bending backwards, and I'm talking about a political system, bending backwards to accommodate Islam and welcoming them virtually bordering to appeasement and pandering? Your thoughts. You're on the mute, Robert, so unmute yourself, please.
Okay, how's that?
Yes, it sounds good now.
Very good. Okay, sorry about that. In any case, the reason why this bill was passed now was because a Republican Congresswoman, Lauren Boebert, made a joke about Ilhan Omar, and she called Omar and her colleague, her Muslim colleague, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, and the rest of their friends, the Jihad Squad, and told a joke about being in an elevator with Ilhan Omar, and a police officer came up, and Lauren Boebert said, "It's all right, she's not wearing a backpack." In other words, she's not going to blow us up. It was just a joke, but on the left, they can't take jokes. They will also use any opportunity that they can to discredit, marginalize, silence, and destroy their opponents. And so Ilhan Omar used Boebert's joke both to get Boebert punished, which is looming. She will probably be censured by the House of Representatives, and also to get this Islamophobia bill passed by claiming that because of Islamophobia, she is receiving regular death threats and so on, and that therefore Islamophobia has to be tackled. This actually leads right into your second question, because why has the United States bent over backwards after 9/11 to accommodate Muslims and even Islamic supremacist advocacy groups that are obviously enabling and aiding active jihadis? Why is that? Because the Muslim groups have very skillfully portrayed themselves as victims and claimed that they are being discriminated against and harassed on a large scale in the United States, which is not true and is not borne out by FBI hate crime statistics. But in any case, because of these claims, the left, which of course is very much attuned to the idea of aiding supposedly marginalized groups, completely fell for this. And Ilhan Omar reinforced her call for this Islamophobia bill by playing a phone message that she got threatening her life. Nobody seemed curious, however, as to how someone got her phone number, her private phone number, and nobody made any inquiries as to who exactly left the message and was it someone who was actually a supporter in order to further her case. But that's the kind of tactic that has been used in the past, to be sure.
Right. No, it is almost baffling. You know, you refer to 9/11, and I will share a personal conversation that I had with somebody who was very wealthy, of Islamic origin, friend of mine, who told me, this is just the beginning. And I'm quoting you because that incident happened with me. People who know me, they know the story. They said that we are going to hit you hardest on every.
They didn't even have to.
They didn't have to. Every single principle that you are proud of, we are going to hit you hard on democratic values in every country of the world.
Yeah, it's been very skillfully.
And the statement was very remarkable, was also a confession that not one single Islamic country will have the ability to engage in a conventional war with any non-Islamic countries, because our weapons also we get from you guys. So we will not last. But we can indulge in jihadi and terrorist activity. How many John Does will you protect sending your Marines? This was a very strong statement. And if you notice, soon after Taliban took over in Afghanistan, they talked about there is no evidence that Osama bin Laden had done all that he was accused of doing. So our philosophies and our concerns are being utilized against us. So Islamophobia, share with us one more thing. The bill does not describe what is Islamophobia. I have read the bill. I noted down all the provisions which are being talked about in establishing in the State Department. But two things showed up in my attention immediately. One of them is that anti-bias and tolerance education will be done. Anti-bias and tolerance education, which means you and I have to study Sharia, right? Because unless we understand Sharia, we will not be able to understand them. And the second part is that act of vandalization against Muslim community, institutions, schools, and mosques, and everything else. The question is, who is doing it? How will the United States law work in any other part of the law? So the question is, any other part of the world, the question is, what is phobia and what is genuine fear? And I might add here, since the Kashmir issue has been most talked about in the Western world today, on one reason or the other, Indians do not need to be told about what's phobia and what's fear. In Kashmir, it's public knowledge and evidence is there. Mosques blared the information: convert, leave, or die. That was the message to every Kashmiri Pandit and Hindus all over. Convert, leave, or die. So if any Hindu were to rise against us, will that be phobia or with a genuine concern? Let's talk about implementing this particular concept. How does one deal with the phobia and the fear aspect?
It's a spurious concept to start with. The idea is that the opposition to jihad violence and Sharia oppression is consigned to a psychological disorder, to a phobia, so that it is stigmatized and marginalized. And the bill does not define Islamophobia for a very specific reason, and that is that it is a conflation of two distinct phenomena. One, the vigilante attacks against innocent Muslims, which are never justified. And second, honest analysis of the motivating ideology behind jihad violence, which is always necessary. And by means of conflating the two, they hope to silence that kind of analysis by claiming or suggesting or even just simply implying that it will lead to those vigilante attacks. That to talk about jihad violence and how the Quran teaches warfare against unbelievers will make people think they have to go and be violent to innocent Muslims. This is absurd, but now it's the official position of the House of Representatives. The bill did not define Islamophobia so that it could be used to silence critics of Islam and not just to fight against those who carry out those vigilante attacks.
It is quite terrible, actually, because I noticed in this particular thing, the bill also mentions 3 countries specifically: China, India, and Myanmar, targeting them, referring them in the bill. I know one thing for sure. I think the rest of the world knows. China would give 2 hoots for this. As it is, we all know what is happening with human rights record of China. Myanmar is too insignificant a country in terms of political power. As a country, it has its own authority. But as a political entity, it is not such a threat to anywhere in the world. India becomes a targeted country. And India will soon, as an economic giant that it is one of the largest trading partners of the United States. India will not acknowledge that, because every Indian knows that Indians do not suffer from Islamophobia. They know Islam and what they are doing there. Is this bill, in a very remarkable, insidious way, intended to undermine US authority globally?
Sure, absolutely. And remember that Ilhan Omar is the same individual who has likened the United States to the Taliban.
Right.
And so if she would, it's not at all be outside the realm of possibility that she would want to see American power limited. And the State Department is, according to this bill, supposed to be monitoring Islamophobia worldwide. But obviously this will have a chilling effect on anything that's accused of being Islamophobia in the United States as well. And since Islamic advocacy groups have very skillfully portrayed any discussion of how Islam teaches violence and terrorism as Islamophobic, that will be silenced as well. And then the reverberations will continue out worldwide, because American policy will not be able to be formulated on the basis of something that is accused of being Islamophobic. And so the United States will be hamstrung in any attempt to oppose any jihad violence, because any action that is that opposes jihad violence in any way has been described in the past as Islamophobic, and that will certainly continue.
It's also very important to figure out that somewhere along the line, the ideology, what we call madrasa ideology, has somewhere along the line seeped into the body politic of American politics. And as a result of which, they are able to get things done the way they want it. Openly, you can't say anything about Islam. It curbs our freedom of speech. It curbs our freedom to even ask a question or make a genuine inquiry. How does this mix and match with the American dream and the American body politic of the society? What is happening here? Why are Democrats falling backwards? Why Republicans are not seeing through this? What is it that has gotten our political system so important?
The fear of racism. Racism is the national trauma of the United States, and the historical trauma, I should say, of the United States. So the Islamic advocacy groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations and the Muslim Public Affairs Council and others, they characterized any opposition to jihad violence as racist. This is something that the left was eager to take up and defend Muslims on the basis of being anti-racist. I myself am called racist on a routine basis because I oppose the jihad ideology, which is held by people of all races. So it's a very strange situation, but it's really the manipulation of the concept of racism and the fear of racism by Islamic groups in the West that has led us to this predicament. And it goes for Democrats as well as Republicans, because of course the Democrats pride themselves on being the party that is opposed to racism. That's not actually true, but that's how they claim to be. So they fell for it right away. And then they would charge various Republicans who would speak out against jihad violence or Sharia as racist, and they were thoroughly wrong-footed, thoroughly intimidated, and so they fell into line as well. And of course, George W. Bush, the president at the time of 9/11, really muddled matters even made matters even worse by claiming 6 days after 9/11 that Islam was a religion of peace. And in other words, signaling to the United States intelligence and law enforcement establishment that to study Islam in order to understand the motives and goals of the terrorists was off base. And ultimately, it took Barack Obama to rule it out of court altogether and to forbid any discussion of Islam in connection with terrorism in the US government. But Bush started that in motion. And so nowadays, both Republicans and Democrats generally tend to think, unless they're informed on these issues, which very few are, if any, they tend to think that any discussion of jihad violence is racist, and so they better stay away from it.
It's so amazing to hear that both Republicans and Democrats are not willing to talk about it, not even debate and discuss. And as a result of which, what is happening is that we are becoming implicitly compliant to the demands of the unreasonable.
Yes.
And and this is very interesting that a friend of mine has asked a question. He wants to remain anonymous, but he made a statement. He said, "This Ilhan Omar's Islamophobia bill will ignore what Muslims do to other religions and religious minorities, including micro-religions, atheists, agnostics, ex-Muslims, etc. This bill itself is a vehicle for creating Islamophobia among non-Muslims. And then such acts as getting the laws passed against Islam and Islamophobia to protect Islam, and in a larger sense, blasphemy, which is my opinion, that this bill legitimizes blasphemy laws.
Oh, very much so, yeah.
Very much so, is the reason why Islamophobia exists. You want to tackle the challenge. We know that racism is not to be encouraged. Bias is not to be encouraged, but they need to be addressed. How do we address that seeming challenge that is coming from them, that you can't even ask a question? What must happen?
Well, they control the government and media. All their friends are in the high places. So all we can do is just continue to insist that this is not a racial issue. This is an issue of an aggressive, violent, expansionist, and supremacist ideology. And as I said a moment ago, people of all races hold to it. There are jihadis of all races, and there are Muslims of all races. And consequently, to say that it's racist is simply irrational. Of course, that's what the public discourse is today, irrational. But the only thing I know to do is just continue telling the truth and explaining that we're calling attention to these issues because of wanting to preserve freedom and the basic lineaments of a free society. I mean, you can look at us here. Actually, my family is from the Islamic world. You are in India. You're not, or of Indian background.
I'm here in New York.
Yes, I remembered you said that at the beginning.
Yeah.
And of course, between Indians and Pakistanis, there's not an ethnic difference. It's a matter of religion. So this is not a racial issue for either of us in reality.
Right.
It's an issue of this ideology. Of course, they know this as well. The elites know this. They only claim that opposition to jihad violence is racism because they know that's an easy way to silence it, to justify silencing it, and to intimidate people into thinking that they better not say anything about it because they don't want to be called racist.
Our desire not to be called racist is absolutely correct, because we are not. That's an important distinction to be made. What we are talking about here today is one of the items in the 7 clauses of this entire bill is to curb propaganda and incitement.
Yeah, that's us. We don't incite, but they claim we do. We don't spread propaganda, but what they're saying is they're going to silence criticism of Islam.
Exactly.
They're going to silence opposition to jihad violence. See, this is something else, my friend, that's a very important point that I always ask when people confront me and say, oh, you're an Islamophobe and a racist and all that. Say, can you name for me any critic of jihad violence and Sharia oppression of women and others who you don't think is an Islamophobe and a racist? In other words, you are claiming that all of us who speak out about these issues are racist and Islamophobic. And yet, really what it's about is that you don't want anyone speaking out about these issues. You want to silence all criticism of Islam completely. If that were not true, then you'd be able to point to someone somewhere and say, well, see, he's a very strong critic of Islam, of jihad, of terrorism, but he's not Islamophobic. But there is no such person, because Islamophobia, the concept itself, is just a weapon to silence criticism of jihad violence.
This is actually disturbing, because we can have a conversation today, but if this particular bill becomes a law, we will be shut down. We can't even ask this question anymore.
That's right. I'm looking forward to an early retirement.
No, that is not a retirement we are looking forward to.
No, I would probably not enjoy my time in a re-education camp.
Yeah, we want to be able to discuss. That's the beauty of our philosophy and our process, that we are able to ask questions, make inquiries, and be critical of things that are not in line with our way of life or our constitution. Because the freedom of speech and freedom of religion is not a one-way traffic, that they can criticize everything that you and I do, but we can't say even a rat's squeal about that. This is the issue that is fundamental to my having this conversation. And, you know, one of the things people say is that, how will they monitor and combat this entire thing in the State Department? And that's where I suspect that this bill is designed to undermine US. The congressmen and senators are not getting it. But they better listen to that element, because tomorrow, if this bill is not implemented and action is not taken against so-called erring countries, you will be talking about sanction, and that will have really unfortunate consequences for America, the country we live in, because it will get into a political and economic tussle with economic giants like China and India, which is not going to be very, very healthy for America.
Yes, no doubt about it. But here again, you're dealing with elements that don't seem to care about that aspect of it. I don't see any evidence that Ilhan Omar wants to see America strong. I don't see any evidence that she wants to see a military that she has derided as being equivalent to a terrorist group. She doesn't want to see that military active. And so if you're talking about how this kind of foreclosure on the discussion about jihad terrorism and how it spreads is going to hurt America, I don't think that's a bug as far as they're concerned. It's a feature.
It's not a bug, it's the feature. That's what is important to bear in mind, because it is also trying to, demand certain things in the West. For example, you are going to see, because they practice everything per Sharia, right? Everything they do is according to Sharia. Tomorrow, they are going to demand that not monogamy, but polygamy must be allowed, because Sharia allows them that privilege. How will America deal with these kind of possibilities? Or is it some kind of an underhand deal?
I don't think that there's any problem with that. I think that very likely it will be legal very soon. It's an interesting thing, when you mention polygamy. A few years back, there was an Italian Muslim group, a Muslim group in Italy, that said, we Muslims in Italy are supporting gay marriage. We are supporting gay marriage not because we approve of it, or certainly not because we will ever have some gay marriages in a mosque, We are supporting gay marriage in order to break down the idea that marriage is between one man and one woman.
Okay.
And once that idea is broken, then we can get polygamy legalized. Now, as an example of how this public discourse is stuck on absolutely a stupid level in the United States, I quoted this and suggested that the reason why Muslim groups in the West were allying with leftist groups that were in favor of gay marriage was for the same reason, as articulated by a Muslim group. And here again, I was called racist and bigoted for suggesting such a thing. But really, when you have it from in the words of Muslim leaders themselves, it's hard to understand why anybody would think that that was somehow Islamophobic. But the American public discourse is completely sold out to a fantasy version of Islam. And consequently, there's no serious discussion of these issues whatsoever.
The fantasy version of Islam, very well said, sir. The fantasy version that doesn't exist really, which is why you are calling it fantasy. This is where the role of education comes in. Who is educating? The masses in America. In India, people have learned by virtue of experience and dealing with the problem, having been ruled by their leaders for a while, and also currently as a very significant 120 million Muslim population. Now, not all of them are jihadis, not all of them are terrorists. There are many, many people who are gallantry award winners, you know, in the war and field of sports, and 3 presidents in India have been Muslim. But here is an important thing. Education part is very critical. Now, thanks to technology, we are now seeing the world in a very different way. People, thanks to technology, we are able to relate and talk, and news travels at the light of speed, or more than that, perhaps. Everything is known. Important part is that there were 2 very interesting videos that came in India. And that's where people need to understand here in America, where we are very, very kind of sleepwalking into certain things in the political dialogue. There was an important political functionary of Muslim world who said that to rule India, our women must produce more children. And the second guy was saying, again a prominent guy, it is not proper for a man and his daughter to stay in the house alone, because the devil will pollute the mind of a man to perform unfortunate sex with his daughter. This is on video. I'm not making it up.
I saw it.
You saw it?
Yes.
How can people ignore this? This is where the education part comes in. How can people ignore this?
Well, you know something, my friend, they can't ignore it. And that's why the tactic of the jihadis and their allies in the United States, as well as around the world, is to discredit those who are calling attention to it. See, if they think that I'm some nut, an Islamophobe and a racist and a hate monger and all these things, then people won't come to my website, Jihad Watch, where they will see reported incidents of that kind. But they will think, well, this guy's dangerous. He's some kook. He's some nut. We better not read what he has. And so it's just dismissed out of hand. And this is the tactic that is being pursued. It's the same thing. I see it all the time on Twitter. People saying that defenders of India's culture, India's national identity, are Hindutva fanatics who are just as bad or worse as jihadis, and so on and so on. This is all the same tactic, designed to discredit the opposition to jihad so that then jihad can advance unopposed and unimpeded. It's the same tactic all over the world because it works, because people fall for it. And this is the problem that we have, that many people are not thoughtful, and they just hear these things, and they hear these people are terrible people for various reasons, and so they accept it. And this is what the jihadis and their allies are counting on.
So they are basically counting on our gullibility or nice-heartedness, if I may say so, in that sense.
That's right, quite right.
Yeah. How do we, as the saying goes, if you don't face the truth, the history, and the nicest statement I read somewhere, an ominous warning that history is littered with corpses of men who forgot the lessons of history.
Oh
And
yeah, here we are.
yeah.
This is the situation that so much of the world is in today. And I can speak for the United States and the West. I can say that it's certainly true that people in Europe and people of European descent have no recollection. They do not know what happened vis-a-vis Muslims in Europe. People say that medieval Spain under Islamic rule was a wonderful, tolerant, multicultural place. This is not true. It's not borne out by the historical records, but it's spread widely in the West, and people accept it. And so this is all designed, you see, for the contemporary political situation. They think that if they can convince people that Islamic rule was wonderful in Spain in the Middle Ages, then they will be less inclined to resist it today. And people who have forgotten the brutality of the jihads around the world, particularly in India, but elsewhere as well, they are, like Santayana said, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And here we are, that it is now stigmatized and demonized in the West to oppose mass Muslim migration into the United States, into Europe. And so those people in those areas, the United States and the European countries, are going to wake up one day and see that there are calls for Islamic rule, for Sharia to be imposed. And they'll find out that that's not as tolerant and multicultural as they were told. But by then it will be too late. And of course, the left is aiding and abetting this, because the leftists are authoritarians. They want to impose authoritarian rule. And this is why they see the Muslims as such good colleagues and partners in their endeavors, because they are authoritarians as well. And so they line up against those who are calling for free society, and they work together to destroy free societies around the globe.
I was going to, you stole my question that I was going to ask you, the reasons why the left and the Islamists make up a perfect partnership. Although they are totally divergent viewpoints, but they make a partnership, collude.
Yes, because they're both thugs. They're both authoritarian thugs. Right. I'll tell you, every time the left has taken power, the far left, I'm not talking about Democrats, although they're getting there, but anytime there's been a hard left regime, it has instituted a reign of terror. The French Revolution, the Soviet Union, so many others, Kampuchea, so many others, a reign of terror. As soon as they get in power, they destroy their enemies, and they terrify the rest of the population into submission by terrorizing their enemies. Now, what does Islam do? What does Sharia do? Sharia is exactly the same as that. Sharia is a reign of terror. It says, if you steal, we'll cut off your hand. If you commit adultery, we'll stone you to death. If you do these various things, these draconian punishments will follow. That's a reign of terror. You're not being virtuous. You're being terrified into submission. That's exactly what the left does. Terrify people into submission. And so they see each other, I think, as deep ideological kin. They both want to establish a paradise on earth based on terrifying people into submission.
How do you think, can this potentially change, this perception? Can we change? Because right now, we have access to technology. Messages travel very fast. People get to know of things very quickly. Where is the rational, logical mind that is in a position to question this? Why isn't it happening? It almost looks like that the laws of physics of equal and opposite reaction do not work in reference to Islamic terrorism, because everybody is frightened. No, there is no reaction. I'm not inciting violence. I'm saying, come on, man. It's one of those Sunday footballs, come on, man analogy. How can you not notice this and comment on that? One of the things talking about education is that the entire logic of Sharia and Muhammad goes through a circular vein. A is true because B is true, and B is true because A is true, right? That's exactly the relationship between Muhammad and Sharia and Allah and Sharia. Who wrote it? Where is the element of truth in it? And if it is so stuck in a century, 1400 years ago, when the reality was different, how can it not be up for revision? So it is not jihad, rather America, United States as the bedrock and the example where everybody wants to come to fulfill his dream. People are willing to give an arm and a leg to come here. We are not able to educate the world. The truth is that the reform is essential. Transformation is key. So if Sharia can't change, there is no hope. Because for them, the solution lies in violence. There is no negotiation. It's my way or highway. Your thoughts?
Well, reform is essential, but it's also very, very, very difficult. The Quran in chapter 5, verse 3 says, "This day I have perfected your religion for you." If your religion is perfected, then any change in it is going to make it worse, not better. This has been used against reformers in Islam throughout history. The death penalty for heresy and apostasy in Sharia means that reformers are often put to death. Mahmoud Muhammad Taha was a reformer in Sudan. In 1985, he taught that the Meccan passages of the Quran, which are more tolerant, should take precedence over the Medinan passages, which are violent. Traditionally, in Islamic theology, it's the other way around. The Medinan passages take precedence over the Meccan. But Mahmoud Muhammad Taha was not greeted as a wonderful reformer and praised and given a big following. He was put to death as a heretic by the Sudanese government. So if we're talking about the necessity for reform, it's certainly true, but the way that Islam is set up makes it extraordinarily difficult to see any kind of actual reform within it, because the reformers will be victimized for heresy or apostasy or both. So it's a very strange situation that we're in, because the best hope we really have is that the jihad continues to advance. I'm not hoping anybody gets killed, but that the jihad advances to the extent that people begin to see through the lies that they've been told. Because the more that they advance, the more people wake up and see that this is not a religion of peace, this is not a religion of tolerance, and this is not a religion that's compatible in its core teachings with the Constitution of the United States or other free societies. But that's not obvious in the United States today, and they'll have to make more advances for it to become such, which will bring a new host of problems as well. So how this turns out, no one knows. But the paradoxical aspect of it is that the very advances that they make tend to undercut their possibility to make further advances because more people wake up.
I am an incorrigible optimist, Robert.
Excellent.
I'm an incorrigible optimist, and I believe that although there is all kinds of saying about this or that not changing, and I think everybody changes. And I look at with pride is the decline of religion that is we are seeing in the West. There are a lot of people who have become ex-Muslims.
Yes.
That group exists. They have a Twitter handle. I follow them with the intent to understand what prompted them to leave. There is a statistics that in the West, people are leaving religion in hordes. 1 out of 4 people are leaving religion, Christianity or Islam, as the case may be. So there is something about religion confluencing with the technology part of it that, there is an acknowledgement today that Wuhan virus did not discriminate between people, races, gender, countries, rich or poor, young or old. Likewise, people recognize that tsunami doesn't happen in Japan because God doesn't like Japanese, or the Middle East is not desert because God somewhere along the line left them with sand and oil. We are not the country where we have so many tornadoes that people lose lives a matter of minutes. We all know that thunder and lightning doesn't happen because gods are angry. There is a very interesting confluence of science and technology that is advancing. This doesn't require, this doesn't have a religious branding. Cancer, ulcer, migraine, they don't have a religious monopoly. That Muslim migraine is milder and beautiful to live with than a Christian cancer is. I am talking about these elements that people will begin to realize. I do not know ex-Muslims. If anybody is ex-Muslim is watching, please get in touch, come on the show, share, educate, and let's experience that part of it. How are they dealing with the threat of, as the saying goes? The point is very simple. Where does this education begin? Does it begin? There's a very interesting thing that somebody from London talked about closing down the madrasa because they are the hellholes where all the brainwashing happens. Closing down the madrasas. In one of the Indian states, the chief minister converted all the madrasas into public schools where science technology can be taken. So there is people who are gutsy can make a difference. A leadership will make a difference. Do you see that happening in the political correct West and the way we are?
Well, you're right. There are an awful lot of ex-Muslims. There are actually many more ex-Muslims than is publicly known. Because of the death penalty for apostasy in Islam, many people in the Islamic world have left Islam, but don't make this known publicly. And there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of them, according to reports that I've heard from some ex-Muslims themselves. The fact is that that is a very significant development because it's not at all certain. As a matter of fact, it's very likely not to be the case that these ex-Muslims will side with the jihadis if it came to a major war. At the same time, there are many ex-Muslims in the West, as you've noted, and this can create a kind of chain reaction because one person is afraid and thinks about the death penalty for apostasy and so on, but then when he or she sees that there are others and they're living openly and freely and even proclaiming that they have left Islam publicly, then they gain the courage to do so themselves. And that's just one thing. The internet has revolutionized the world. And people in Saudi Arabia, people in other Muslim countries where Sharia is strictly enforced, people in Iran, they can learn about difficulties with Islamic teaching. They can learn about challenges to Islam right on the internet easily. When it used to be, they would never ever hear those things in their entire lives, because if you went into Saudi Arabia and started preaching that the Quran is full of contradictions and is clearly not the work of a prophet, you would just be put to death. But now you can have somebody discussing this in a video and giving the evidence, and you can't prevent someone in a Sharia state from seeing it. And so a tremendous source of hope that this ultimately, the challenge that comes from the modern technology being able to transmit information to where it was never available before, will be able to show people that this whole thing is an extraordinary ruse and that there's nothing to it and that they can and should leave it on the basis of the shared humanity of all of us, that we know what's right and wrong in our own soul. There's religious teaching, but ultimately everyone has a conscience, and Muslims have a conscience as well. And that conscience is violated many times over by Islamic teaching telling them that these things are okay to do. But then sometimes they can encounter this material on the internet, and this changes everything.
Yes, you are right. I agree with you, because there are people who have, for example, there was a Muslim executive of a company, and he was very distressed. He asked me this question very simply: why is Islam misunderstood in this part of the world? And I said to him, it is not misunderstood. It is understood exactly the way you are conveying it. And I asked him that you are an educated guy. You are working as such a high senior executive, my compatriot, in my colleagues of kind. And I said, do you believe in the concept of 72 virgins? in these 21st century? He went silent for 10 seconds, Robert. And I said, there is your answer. That even an educated person like you could not deny the potential non-existence. I'm not asking you to categorically prove it, they don't exist. You could not even talk about the potential non-existence of the 72, right? That's the issue. So question arises is, where do we go from here, as the saying goes? Are we going to be succumbing to it? Is Senate going to pass this bill? You mean to say that senators are going to be so what do you call, so oblivious to the truth, the ugly truth?
Yes. I'd be very surprised if the Senate didn't pass this bill, because as I noted before, the Republicans are just as clueless as the Democrats when it comes to what the whole Islamophobia initiative is about and how it's designed just to shut down any resistance to jihad violence and Sharia oppression. And so the Republicans are 50 senators, the Democrats are 50 senators, and then the vice president has the tie-breaking vote. So even if all the Republicans voted against it, which is unlikely, then they would still have 51 with the vice president. The Republicans also, I'm sure that there's some of them who will vote for it because they will believe that it's just a bill to prevent race hatred and prejudice. And they have no understanding of the other agenda that is involved with the bill. And so I would expect that Romney, maybe Graham, probably a few others, Murkowski, will vote in favor of the bill. It will pass with 53, 55 senators in favor, probably more.
And Democrats always vote en bloc.
Yes.
So they don't break with each other. You know.
Never.
Well, what was disturbing for me when the Georgia election, Senate elections runoff happened, at that time I remember Tlaib and Ilhan openly made the statement that all Muslims must vote for Democrats. This is our opportunity to do this. And I was struck by that. And I said, I actually asked people, what if Hindus were to give this call? What would have happened? If Christians were to give this call, what would happen? If the Jews were to give this call, we would all be branded as the ugliest of words. But why is it that Islam gets away? This brings me to the final question of the day. Guys, ask questions if you have any. We have a couple of questions already. But one thing which I wanted to check with you that, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, all these giant media leadership, they act almost Hitlerian, if fascist, if not Hitlerian. They choose what is free speech. Your free speech and my free speech doesn't matter. How does one deal with that?
Well, I don't know. I wish I knew, because they're going to shut me down. I was already classified by the Global Internet Forum for Counterterrorism, which is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and so on. It's their counterterror arm. I've been classified as a violent extremist, and I had a lawyer write to them and say, you have to retract this because Spencer has never advocated for violence or approved of any violence or anything of the kind. And they said, no, but he reports about what jihadis do, and this makes people want to be violent against Muslims. Now, this is ridiculous. You could say that about anything. If this were true, then you couldn't criticize anything. Because if I were to criticize, for example, supporters of Trump, then you could argue that, well, you're just making people want to attack them and kill them. So you can't talk about that either. And obviously the Democrats don't believe that. Or the social media giants don't believe that. But this is what they've done. And so I don't know how much longer I've got, but I'm expecting I'll be shut down fairly soon. And then it's just a matter of whether these various initiatives to try to establish alternatives to big tech will succeed. And that remains to be seen. Trump has mentioned that he's going to start a social media company. Maybe that will make a difference. We'll see.
Yeah, I hope alternatives do emerge. I always believe that there is always a new option. And, as the saying goes, that necessity is the mother of all inventions. Something will happen. Because, in India, for example, there is a famous journalist called Aarti Tikku. She's a Kashmiri lady. one of those who have been expelled from that country, faced exodus from that area, had to leave under the threat of convert, leave, or die. Her Twitter account, in which her brother was threatened by some Islamist groups, and she said that they have been threatened by Islamist group, Twitter banned her account. And they said that they will release the account only if she apologizes and pulls back that statement. And she was gutsy to tell Twitter, go to hell, I'm never withdrawing. Obviously, there will be a solution. There will be an uprising. I do believe, in management jargon, it's called every trend has a counter trend. And the law of physics, equal and opposite reaction, maybe sometime it will happen. It has been a fabulous conversation, Robert, to have with you. Let's take up a couple of questions which people have, and then we will close the shop.
Thank you.
Adventure Time. Thank you, Adventure Time. Sir, don't you think that Islamophobia bill will negatively affect relations between India and US, which directly benefits China plus Islam and authoritarianism?
Yes, very much so. I wouldn't be surprised if that was part of the reason why it was introduced. That Narendra Modi is an international symbol of, for better or worse, resistance to all this. And so Omar and her cohort want to weaken the friendship between the United States and India, or make the United States afraid to be cooperative with India because it will be Islamophobic. And so the beneficiaries will be Pakistan and, of course, China.
If I may add one question to follow up to this one, is that recently I read that the United States has sanctioned some of the 5 or 6 Bangladeshi people, some generals and police officers, on the account of what they did to the minorities. What is it special about United States and Pakistan? Every Indian wonders, how could America be sleeping with a genuine, authentic enemy whose prime minister or some minister made a statement that in Afghanistan we defeated America without firing a bullet?
I wish I knew, but it's extraordinarily strange. And it's probably that politicians have been paid, because you take, for example, the fact that after 9/11, George W. Bush met with Musharraf and agreed to give over $1 billion every year to Pakistan to fight Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Of course, it quickly came out that most of that money was being given to Al-Qaeda and the Taliban by the Pakistani government. And in 2008, the New York Times, one of the leading newspapers in the world, published a huge expose about how Pakistan was giving this money that it was getting to fight terrorism, giving it to the terrorists. In response, the United States Congress increased the amount of money given to Pakistan every year. Now that's just insanity. But that's the level of the political discourse in America about Pakistan. I don't know what's going on, but I expect these people are very corrupt, and that someone's paying them very well to do this.
Correct. Next question, please. Adventure Time again. Sir, are Western elites really stupid, or they know the truth but are using the sword of Islam plus shield of left to build totalitarian new world order?
I suspect it's the latter. I think that the leftist elites love Islam because they understand that Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, is supposed to have said, obey the ruler even if he is an Ethiopian with a head like a raisin. This is often quoted as showing how he was racist, but I think more important is the fact that he's saying, obey your ruler no matter what. That's the kind of docility the left wants from the population. And so Islam is their favorite religion because it lends itself very well to authoritarianism.
Next question, please. I would never have thought that the West people... There was one question from Pat Broad. He said, can you check that out? Question, please. Has America surrendered to Islamization?
Yeah, pretty much. Years ago, Pamela Geller and I started a group, Stop Islamization of America. And of course, this was another sign of racism and bigotry as far as the elites were concerned. But we were talking about the imposition of Sharia provisions in the United States and the granting of Muslim groups special privileges that other groups did not have. And this initiative has only advanced in the years since then. But any opposition is derided as Islamophobic and bigoted, so it will just keep going.
I think Bill Warner had mentioned that this Islamophobia bill is a direct sign that Islam has gotten into the arteries and veins of American political system.
Yes.
All right. With these words, with these warnings, this free and frank conversation, I want to thank you, Robert, for joining us today.
Thank you.
You come again, and I can assure you that the way we pose the issue, we will never be banned.
Okay.
We are here to do in the God's scheme of things. Thank you very much. Please like, subscribe to the channel, and support us. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, too.
Press the bell icon on